Hey guys, just wanted to send you a video to let you know what we're going to be talking about this week. I'm really excited about this week's talk. I apologize, the middle school and the high school talks are going to be a little bit different, but everybody's going to be in Romans 6 and all over the place between about 1 and 16. In middle school, we're really going to be focusing on the kind of the first two verses, and it's going to be a little bit simpler. High school, we're going to focus on the first couple of verses, and then really heavily on 14 and 16. Most of the verses are going to be kind of paraphrased into the stories and things like that, but I will make sure that you guys have the verses in front of you to kind of reference with your students. This week's going to be an important week to kind of process through some stuff ahead of time, because I'm very much going to leave a couple of things wide open and let your group kind of go where it needs to go, because this is a great topic to do that on. So Romans 6, 1 through 14 is basically, it starts out saying that, in the New Living Translation, it says, well then, should we keep on sinning so that God can show us more and more of His wonderful grace? And the second verse starts out, of course not. And so, and basically then continues on, since we have died to sin, how can we continue to live in it? And then when you go in further, it starts talking about, basically how can you live in these two different worlds and things like that. So I encourage you guys to go through and to read that. And so, because why we want to talk about this, I'll lead into this, is because we've been talking about this relational God and about how He wants to have a relationship with us above all else, and how He loves us no matter what, and there's nothing we can do to make ourselves any brighter or shinier to God, or any, if we've accepted Him, we're forgiven, all of that kind of stuff. And so there can be this attitude of, well, then if I'm forgiven and if I'm loved no matter what, then does it matter what I do? And so that's what we're going to basically be talking about in a nutshell this week. So we'll start out telling a story, and I'll start out telling a story, and the key phrase in there is going to be because I can, or because I could. And so I'm going to tell a story about me riding a roller coaster, and I get really motion sick, but I love roller coasters for some weird reason, and so I really shouldn't get on them. I know better than that, but sometimes I just do, just kind of because I can. And so I tell a story of when some friends and I went to Six Flags and no one was there, and so I ride it once and no one's there to get on, and I shouldn't even got on the first time. And so we go again because no one's there, and I know better. I mean, I should get off at this point. But right, you never get to get on the front of the roller coaster multiple times in a row without a line. It never happens. And so kind of just because I could, and also kind of because my friends were kind of pushing me to, got on a third time, ended up getting terribly sick. Fortunately not on the roller coaster, but I'll tell that story, and it's basically, I did it because I could. I knew better than to do it. It wasn't the right thing for me just because I could do it, if that makes sense. And so I'll kind of start out telling that story, and then you guys will break into groups both in high school and middle school and talk about a time where maybe you've taken advantage of a situation. And it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, but it's kind of one of those, like, you did it just because you could, and maybe it turned out good, maybe it turned out bad. And so if you guys have a story from that, like that in your life, that would be kind of a fun time to share it. Could be a fun story of when you threw up all over yourself, like me. So there you go. And then we'll kind of get into the kind of the scripture part of it. And so I'll talk about, basically I'll break down what we've been talking about the last several weeks. There's a guy that wants a relationship with us, and basically we can't have a relationship with him. We can't get to him by ourselves because of our mistakes and things like that. So He came to us, and we'll talk about, really briefly what Jesus did for us. And so then the question that we'll ask is, okay, so you're saying I'm loved no matter what, I'm forgiven no matter what, then awesome. Like, I can do whatever I want. I can, whatever. And it's, why would you do that? Well, because I can. Because I have the freedom to. And so we'll start looking at that, and we'll look at what Paul said to the Romans about how even though you can, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right thing to do. And so with middle schoolers, we're going to kind of break it down really simply. It's, yes, you have a choice, but you do have to in fact choose, the direction you want to, that you want to go. It's almost like a light side, dark side conversation, if that makes sense. It's, yes, you're free to do it, but that's not a good life for you. It's not, yeah, I could ride the roller coaster all I wanted, but, I'd vomit all over myself afterwards. It's kind of a crummy situation. The middle school story will very much revolve around that analogy of that roller coaster for the majority of the time. The high school, we're going to talk about the roller coaster for a moment, but we're going to switch gears. And it's so same thing. We'll break down what it was that Jesus did for us, and same argument. If I'm loved, if I'm forgiven, should I keep on? I mean, can I do whatever I want just because I can? And so we're going to actually dive deeper into the scripture, into basically the verses that I'm really going to highlight are Romans 6:14 and 16, which 14 reads, "Sin is no longer your master, for you no longer live under the requirements of the law. Instead, you live under the freedom of God's grace." I'm going to just jump down to 16 really quick. "Don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? You can be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living." And so we'll kind of talk about that, and basically how just because you can is a terrible, terrible reason to live a crappy life, if that makes sense. And so the analogy kind of that will be used is because it makes sense in my head, and I certainly hope it makes sense in your students' heads and in yours, is, imagine a dog that's been chained to a tree for years and that hasn't been taken care of in his own filth and things like that. And so one day somebody comes and unclips him and gives him a choice, basically, and says, yes, you can stay, but you have the freedom to go. And too often we choose to stay, sometimes because we don't think about it, and sometimes, for lots and lots of different reasons, and kind of looking at maybe you don't know, maybe I don't understand what you're struggling with. I likely don't understand what it is that you're personally struggling with. I don't understand how hard it is. I don't understand the temptations of it. But my question is, are you still kind of, in a nutshell, are you still hanging out by that tree? And I don't literally, in some ways I mean, where are you hanging out? In some ways it's, you're free from that. If you've taken that step of faith, you don't have to be chained to that tree. You're physically not chained to it anymore. What's keeping you there? And like I said, just because you can is a terrible reason to live a terrible life. And so I certainly hope that resonates with some of our high school students. It's not that I don't think it would resonate with our middle school students. We're just going to kind of stay on just in kind of a simpler path this week with them, and we're going to go right back into that in the end, into that roller coaster analogy of just because I could was a terrible reason to get back on it. Just because my friends told me that I should get back on it again was a terrible, terrible reason for me to do it, because in the end, I mean, literally I was covered in vomit. There were consequences for what I'd done. Just because I could was a terrible reason to do it. And so you guys can kind of process through what that looks like for your groups, and you're more than welcome. I'll make sure you guys have the verses that we're using with high school. You guys are more than welcome to dive into that with your groups if it feels right. For the high schoolers, like I said, you guys will have all of these verses available for you and stuff ahead of time. What I want to challenge you high school leaders to do is kind of prep some thoughts, because it is very analogy based, this talk is, especially with the dog being chained to the tree and things like that. And so I want you guys to think of the kinds of things, like the trees, if you will, that they may be standing in, or the things that they may be standing in. For example, anger or sadness or pain, or, I mean, even very tangible things like pornography or other, relationships, things that they may be struggling with, that they're standing in, that they can walk away from, and just maybe that they're not aware that they can break free from, that they don't have to be tied to, should they choose not to be, that they do in fact have a choice whether or not they're tied to them. I will make a list of some of those things, common like struggles like anger and fear and sadness, things that we don't have to live with, but we don't necessarily, we don't walk away from because we kind of forget that we're not chained to them anymore, if that makes sense. Of course, as always, if you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact me. All of the scriptures, if you want to read ahead, and it's all good stuff, it's all very relevant, is Romans 6:1 through 16 is what we're going to be looking at this week. And that's all I got. I apologize that this video is so long, but really excited for this talk, and hope you guys have an awesome weekend. Thank you so much. Bye.